What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Homie Hangout, where we help others move in excellence. And I'm gonna talk about some of the problems with Northern rap. And I use Northern instead of Norteño for a reason. I'm gonna get into that. First off, let me say this is not directed towards any rapper. This is not a hatred on the genre of music. This is not some kind of subliminal side, nothing of the sort, right? All this is a critique a little bit and hopefully to raise some awareness, not only for current artists, but aspiring artists. And so here's the thing. You got a lot of these cats talking about the North and talking about their neighborhood and talking about all that stuff. And I don't have an issue with people identifying as Northerners or identifying as Southerners or identifying as whatever they are, right? Like there's something to be said for being proud of where you're from. And where you're from is where you're from, and your community should mean a lot to you. And so I get that. I understand that. And that's not what this is about. But some of these Northern rappers talk about, I push for the cause. I push, pull, strive. I'm for the struggle. I'm for this and that. And I would use caution in using those terms, because what you're talking about is an institutional movement, right? A movement that started behind the wall. And that movement is very different than the movement that's in your neighborhood 99% of the time, right? And so when you talk about those things, you're talking about, the struggle for the betterment of the raza and equal, standing and social status of equality and unity and standing up against the oppression of other group segments and so forth, so on and so forth. But a lot of folks do that without really knowing what they're talking about, to be honest. Or they've been schooled in a struggle that did exist at one time, but I hate to break it to you, it doesn't really exist anymore. And this is not me putting anybody down. I was a Norteño, I was a hermano. I handled my business behind the wall, and I represented that movement and that cause with pride, and was well educated in it and educated others in it. And it was an important part of my life, right? And some of the values that I learned there are still an important part of my life, but I apply them to my life broadly rather than the narrow lens of certain groups and not certain groups. But think about it. You've got the NF and MA walking around on main lines together, right? And that cause in that movement was to stand up against the oppression, the perceived oppression, the real oppression, however you want to see it, of that criminal organization versus those for the North. And so those dynamics have shifted, right? And over the years, even while I was incarcerated and before I was incarcerated, I'm sure, but it's radically changed since. There's been a shift, right? The hermano struggle, the Norteño struggle does not exist anymore in the sense that it's being repeated in this rap music. And I don't blame folks for not understanding that, because a lot of these rappers haven't really done time. And that's not a put down, that's a reality. Folks use music to stay out the streets, to stay off the block, to not get caught up. And I'm not saying that some of these rappers haven't been in the streets handling their business, haven't been violent, haven't hustled, haven't done the stuff they say in their music. Some have, and I'm sure some haven't. And I don't know which is which, and I don't really care, because that's not what this message is about. But when you're making music and you're talking about this beautiful struggle and cause and unity and raza and we stand for each other, where you gonna find that at? You might find that in your neighborhood, but you are not gonna find that in prison, homie. That doesn't exist anymore in there. And so when you say that, you're promoting something that doesn't exist. Again, it might exist in your neighborhood, but that's not because your neighborhood is a Northerner neighborhood, right? Not necessarily. That's because of the people in your neighborhood and your community and the folks that you rock with. And so that is true regardless of how you identify, right? And again, I'm not trying to tell people to pull away from that Northerner identity. That's a choice you have to make at various stages in your life. I would caution you against what that label means once you go behind the wall and so on, but hopefully you don't go there, right? And so that's one aspect of what's wrong, so to speak, with Northerner rap, is it tends to promote something that's not there. Now there are Norteños that are rapping, right? And some of those Norteños are good rappers. There's people that in my time would have been called hermanos, would have called bros, right? Nuestra raza, northern structure, whatever you want to call it. Now I guess they're called Norteños. But same basic idea, except the idea of the hermano movement, of the Nuestra raza movement, is gone. Period. It does not exist, man. And for better or for worse, depending on who you talk to and how you look at it, right? But this is an NF movement, and the NF is a capitalist organization, and it's a criminal organization that is predicated on money. And so, which if that's what you want to be a part of, hey, have at it, right? But they operate different, right? Go Google the NF Constitution, you can find it, and tell me where it talks about the betterment of the people. Tell me when it talks about the cause and the struggle. Tell me where it talks about that stuff, right? The bonds talk about that stuff. The format talks about that stuff. The phases talks about that stuff. Lots of schooling talks about that stuff. Show me the NF schooling that talks about that though. You know what I mean? And not to say that that is not what the NF stood for at one point in time, but it has not stood for that in your lifetime, most likely, depending on the age of the person watching. And again, that's not a put down to them. They do you, right? But it's not what you're talking about in your music. That's not what you're saying, right? And so, and I don't blame you because you probably don't know that. That's why I'm trying to give you a heads up. The other aspect is when you do Northerner music, wait until you blow up a little bit. Wait till you get some money in your pocket. They will come knocking at your door. Why? Because it's not about the betterment and the advance of the people. It's about money. And you don't own that label, right? You can identify as a Northerner, a Norteño, whatever you want. You can identify however you choose, but you don't own that label, right? You go to jail and you say, hey, homie, I'm this. Well, if they decide you're not, you're not. And you can say you're still that on your way to the hospital. You can say you're still that while you're locked up in PC or on the SNY yard. You can say whatever you want. But that collective that created that identity don't want no part of you. And so you don't own that. And because you don't own that, if you make money off of that, which is what the perception is, if you're out there running around talking about red bandanas and getting down on the ops and all this other stuff, then you're going to get got at. And maybe you're looking out for somebody right now. Maybe you got a homeboy and you have this cozy relationship, right? You voluntarily look out for folks. Change your mind and watch what happens, right? That voluntary is going to change. Those hands are going to be out. And if you don't put something in that hand, they're going to put something in you. And that's just the reality of how it works. Again, if you're okay with that, keep it pushing. You know what I mean? I'm not challenging your decisions. I just want folks to have the information to make decisions that they can live with and decisions that they're happy with, right? So there's that factor. And then, you know, and part of the evidence of that, man, if you look at some of these rappers that have been around for a while, that have been doing this Northerner rap for, you know, for a decade plus, right? A couple decades. And there's not many, you know, still around, but there's a few. For the most part, look how their music has changed, right? Use Big Tone as an example. I got nothing against the dude, right? Him and Davina was at my wedding. I've been in the studio with him. I've been to his house. And so we're not best friends. We don't talk all the time. We don't kick it all the time. But I'm familiar with him. I've been around him. I've been to shows. I've done shows with him when I was doing music, right? Which is a whole nother story. But his music now is not, you know, Northside Party, right? It's not that. It's hustle, it's business, it's this, it's that. And I'm not gonna say that there's any outside influence that led to his choices, right? That's for him to talk about if he ever wants to, you know what I mean? And I don't know all the details of it, and I don't pretend to. But what I do know is he's grown. What I do know is he's not on the block. He is not taking penitentiary chances. He's a business owner. He's an entrepreneur. He has a family to provide for. His music and his businesses and his brand pays the bills, right? And so that's what he talks about, because that is what his life is today. Is he no longer a Northerner? Does he now not give a shit about, like, I doubt he has any ill feelings towards any of that. I doubt he has abandoned any of those identities. It's not about abandoning, it's about leveling up, right? And it's not about rejecting and turning your back on people. People get older, people's priorities change. We have families, we do this. We have something to lose, so we don't want to go to jail. It's not because we're punks and we're cowards and all this other shit. It's because we don't want to go to jail, right? There's something to live for out here that you're not going to find behind the wall. And when I was young, that wasn't the case. There was nothing to live for out here that I couldn't find in prison, man, because I lived and died for my homeboys, right? And I had homeboys in prison too, so didn't mind going there. But I'm 45 now, and that's changed. And all these young rappers, bro, you're gonna get older. You're gonna have other priorities, and a lot of them do. You know, a lot of them, like I said, use music to stay off the streets. Some of them talk about what they've done, and their stories are authentic, and others talked about what they have observed and what they've been on the sideline watching. And I don't criticize either one. You know, people in either camp, right? That's true across the board. But so that's another concern, right? That's another thing that potentially could be wrong with Northern Rap is you're setting yourself up to invite a criminal organization to have an influence in your music, man. That is your art, it's your music, it's your hard work, right? And your art and your music and your creativity is not defined by where you're from, it's defined by your own gifts and your own effort. And so why allow somebody else to come in and debo you, which is basically what happens. What, so that if you go to prison, you're gonna be okay? Newsflash, homie, don't go to fucking prison, right? Like, the goal should not be to set ourselves up to be safe and successful and embraced in prison. Our goal should be to stay out of prison and still maintain our integrity as individuals, still maintain pride in where you're from. There's no problem with that. Everybody does it. It's just we get criminalized for it. So that's the issue. Lastly, or you know, third, is you're limiting your fan base, right? I've talked about my brother before. He's been a rapper for most of our lives, right? And been good. And he's done some Norteño songs and that kind of stuff. And a lot of the stuff he's pulled off the airwaves, right? Because it's not something he's promoting. Is he from Northern California? Absolutely. Does he have a lot of the similar tattoos that I do in terms of representing, you know, where he's from and everything else? Absolutely. Has he put in his work? Has he done his thing? Absolutely. Right? Never went to prison, but stayed in the streets and stayed in the mix, you know, for most of my prison term. And you know, he's been on label, you know, Sav It Out is kind of a Norteño, was built as a Norteño rap label, right? But he has always said from the beginning, I don't want to limit my audience, right? If you have some non-affiliated square ass person that maybe is on the fringes of the neighborhood and they're driving around and they're blasting all this gangbang ass music, you know, Norte this and Norte that, and F these dudes and F those dudes, and I dress like this and I do this and blah, blah. What happens when somebody that don't like Northerners pulls up next to them and hears their music and they get caught up in the cross, right? It only has to happen once for everybody that knows them and everybody that hears of the situation who's not in the mix to be like, so I'm bumping that music, right? What about people that are affiliated from other areas, right? What about folks down south? Right? In particular, like Raza down south. A lot of these Northerners make music that's not about gangbanging as well. So mixed in between all this red bandana stuff is love songs, is party songs, is struggle songs, is all kinds of things. And it's dope music. I listen to it often. It's incredible music if you're a fan of rap. And you cut yourself off from a whole audience of people who's like, nah, if I ain't gonna listen to that Buster, nah, right? And that's not good for your brand. You know what I mean? And I've heard some folks like, oh, well, look at Snoop Dogg. He could wear a whole blue bandana outfit on stage at the Super Bowl. Yes, that's not your truth. That's not your reality. And we could sit and nitpick why this blood and Crip identity is much more socially acceptable in pop culture than the North-South. And that's a worthy conversation. We can have that conversation. But while we're having that conversation, the reality right now is that ship don't sail when it comes to raza, right? To some degree with Southerners, because Southerner culture and LA culture and Chicano culture are all kind of intertwined, right? For better or for worse, it's all kind of intertwined, and that's what's helped export it around the country, right? And so there is a little bit of element there where, you know, people that are not Southsiders, but that are just raza from other places will listen to some Southern California artists that talk about being from LA and talking about being sureños, this and that. But everybody, all raza down south that claims anything claims to be a Southsider for the most part, right? So just identifying as a Southerner is not set tripping down there. You know what I mean? Because the neighborhood that your homeboys shoot at and shoot at you, you know, they're still Southerners too. And so it's just a little bit different. Up north, you have upstate sureños, you have, you know, all kinds of stuff. So the dynamics are different. So anyways, it's a brief video. It's a cautionary video, man. There's a lot of very gifted artists, man, that work really hard and have a lot of skills. But I think there are some missteps in the movement of this music. And Northern rap is coming up, bro. Latino, Chicano, Mexican artists from Northern California are getting a lot of attention, but that fan base is limited, right? And you're bending it a little bit. You're going outside the box a little bit. And a lot of them, again, have songs that aren't about banging, but it's mixed in with a whole bunch of other stuff. And so shout out all the artists, no matter where you're from, no matter how you identify. Shout out everybody working on a legal hustle. Shout out everybody that's just trying to get paid and provide for their families. Shout out everybody that's trying to put their homeboys on and represent their homeboys and represent where they're from, right? All of that is beautiful. All of that is admirable. Nobody asked my opinion, but for what it's worth, I support all of that, no matter who you are and where you're from. But be mindful of some of the language you use, right? You guys are Northerners, man. You're not Norteños. And I don't say that as a put down, and I don't say that as a challenge. But in the prison language, right, which is where everything starts, you're not Norteños, you're Northerners, and that's a good thing if you ask me, right? Stay that way, because you start getting into the politics, man, and it gets goofy, and we're living in very uncertain times when it comes to the politics. Who knows how stuff's gonna shake out, you know? And there's some specific situations that have happened in recent history that kind of support some of the things that I'm saying, but I'm not gonna get into those, because then I'm selecting some people or I'm selecting some labels and I'm doing all that. That's not what I intend to do, right? This is not a diss towards anybody. I know a lot of Northern rappers, right? And they're dope and they make good music and I listen to a lot of their music, right? But I'm not gonna listen to music down the street that's calling other people derogatory names, right? In terms of where they're from. I'm not gonna drive down the street listening to music that's talking about red bandanas and gangbanging and red belts. Does some of that stuff stir something in me because of my past, because of my identity, because of how I got down? Sure, I'm human like anybody else. But I'm not trying to promote that to the masses. So I can't support those songs. You know what I mean? And I don't want my kids to hear those songs, because then questions come up, right? And the last thing I want is my son running around throwing up a 4, or my daughter, you know, catching somebody's eye or you know, checking somebody out as they get older, which is hard to even imagine. But because oh, they look like what they hear about in entertainment. No, it's I'm not for that, man. And so, anyways, help others move in excellence. That's what homies do. Help yourself at the same time, because you're worth it. I got a bunch of content. Go check it out, man. I cover a range of issues. And again, it's just my 2 cents. You know, I ain't trying to put nobody down, man. I'm just trying to lift us up in my own way. And I hope folks can appreciate that. Have a good one.